So hello, welcome back to Books and Things, and here we are again on the second day of a fortnight of Charles Dickens. Today I'm going to be talking about the next Dickens book in my list, which is Nicholas Nickleby. Chapter 1 introduces all the rest. There once lived in a sequestered part of the county of Devonshire one Mr. Godfrey Nickleby, a worthy gentleman who, taking it into his head rather late in life that he must get married, and not being young enough or rich enough to esquire the hand of a lady of fortune, had wedded an old flame out of mere attachment, who in her turn had taken him for the same reason. Thus two people who cannot afford to play cards for money sometimes sit down to a quiet game for love. I really forget how odd some Dickensian openings can be. Today I'm talking about my second least favourite Dickens novel, which is Nicholas Nickleby. I am much more fond of Nicholas Nickleby than Oliver Twist, I should say. Oliver Twist is by quite a long way my least favourite, and I do have many affections in my heart for Nicholas Nickleby, especially as I did study it in my dissertation, and especially as I own this rather collapsing, but yet still beautiful, first edition of Nicholas Nickleby, which is, if I say so myself, quite lovely. Nicholas Nickleby follows the story of a young man named, quite unsurprisingly, Nicholas Nickleby. At the very beginning of Nicholas Nickleby, his father dies, leaving his mother a widow with two children, Nicholas Nickleby and his sister Kate Nickleby. Their family are left with very little money, and they become reliant for their livelihood on an uncle of Nicholas's named Mr. Ralph Nickleby. But Mr. Ralph Nickleby is not a very nice man who kind of refuses to help them. He gives them a very little help, but otherwise pushes them in their own direction. He sends Nicholas Nickleby off to be a school teacher in a horrible school, one of the famous awful literary schools of the Victorian period, Dotheboys Hall, run by an awful, horrible, but brilliantly grotesque man called Wackford Squeers. Meanwhile, back in London, Kate Nickleby becomes a seamstress to help support her and her mother, who is not really fit for any work, and the story kind of goes on from there, following the life and adventures of Nicholas Nickleby as he moves around England, doing various things, joining various groups of people, trying his hand at various different things to do with his career. It's probably more of an adventure story than some of Dickens's other novels, and it has a pretty straightforward plot in that it's following Nicholas Nickleby in his kind of aim to make something of himself in life. First off, I'm going to talk about some things that I love about Nicholas Nickleby. What I love about Nicholas Nickleby, one of the things, is that it has a really broad cast, including a lot of very different and unusual characters, including the lawyer brothers, the Cherubles, who are a pair of twin brothers who are hilarious and brilliant. Also includes the people that run the Dotheboys Hall, the school where Nicholas Nickleby teaches, Wackford Squeers and his wife and their daughter Fanny Squeers, who is hilarious, awfully caricatured, but so funny. There's also Smike, who is a boy who lives and sort of works at the school Nicholas Nickleby teaches at. He doesn't have anywhere to go, so he's kind of been kept on at the school even though he's older than most of the pupils, and he is just treated atrociously. He is such a wonderful character. He is possibly my favourite character in Nicholas Nickleby. Moving on from my great love of Smike, I also love Newman Noggs. Newman Noggs is a brilliant character. He's the clerk of Nicholas's Uncle Ralph, but he is much more kind-hearted than Ralph. He is a little bit over the top, but in a wonderful way, and he's just so likeable and lovable. One of those minor Dickens characters who is very eccentric, but in a really beautiful way that you just want to kind of go up and give him a hug. And I do love the Nicholas Nickleby. There is such an eccentric cast of characters. The Nicholas and Smike travel quite a lot of the country, meeting a lot of different people, is really cool. I think as well the plot structure of Nicholas Nickleby is very good. It moves often between Nicholas and his sister Kate in London in quite an effective way, and I like how everything kind of comes together in the end. It's very cleverly done, and the kind of base plotline, excluding all romantic plot lines, is not that predictable in Nicholas Nickleby. The romantic plot lines are probably not even fleshed out enough to be predictable, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Like many other Dickens novels, Nicholas Nickleby is very funny, and I do think there are some brilliant passages in it, especially the time Nicholas spends at Dotheboys Hall, the school. I think that is done really well, and there are some brilliant characters, and also I think the whole plot hangs quite well together. However, stuff I like less about Nicholas Nickleby. There is quite a lot, mainly, like with the majority of the first half of Dickens's work, I have an issue, I suppose, with the presentation of women in it. It's not very well developed, and in fact the presentation of kind of everyone in a lot of Dickens's early works is a bit more caricatured. The presentations we get of women and femininity and the interpretations we get of masculinity are all quite basic. Kate Nickleby is quite an unusual character in early Dickens in that she is a central female character. In the vast majority of Dickens's early novels, up until Dombey and Son, where for me and for gender in Dickens everything changes, up until Dombey and Son, most of Dickens's books are very male and they don't have that many female characters, and even when they have a lot of female characters they don't tend to be the central characters and they don't tend to be nearly as important as most of the men. A lot of Dickens's early works feel very male. Nicholas Nickleby is quite unusual in that it has two central characters and one of them is a woman. However, Kate Nickleby for me is not a very well developed character. In fact, both Kate and Nicholas are not very well developed characters. Again, a bit like an Oliver Twist, the surrounding cast are much more interesting than the two central characters. Nicholas Nickleby for me is a very bland hero. He's kind of, you know, what every good hero should be. He's good looking and nice and well-meaning, and that's kind of it. And Kate Nickleby is virtuous and hardworking and maidenly and pathetic, and that's about all. I just don't find either of them very engaging or interesting as central characters. It's one thing to have a character that is a bit bland and therefore not very believable, but it's not just that, they're also not that interesting to read about, and I just don't find Nicholas Nickleby, and especially Kate, that interesting. In general, Nicholas Nickleby's presentation of women, like the presentation of women in a lot of early Dickens, is not great. The women spend a lot of time fainting and crying, and they don't do that much else, which is a shame, especially because in Dickens's later novels, the presentation of women and the way he deals with issues of femininity and what it means to be a woman in Victorian society are really, really interesting. But I do find that a bit tricky in Nicholas Nickleby. It doesn't stop me enjoying the book. I still love so many things about it, but it stops me truly loving it as much as I love some of his other books. Another thing that grates me in Nicholas Nickleby, which grates me in a lot of early Dickens, is that the romantic relationships that are there are not very well developed and they're kind of assumed. I'm going to say assumed. What I mean is that characters fall in love and then they're in love, but you never see it, you're just told that they're in love. And I think in some of Dickens's later novels you have really interesting male-female romantic relationships, but in Nicholas Nickleby you just get a lot of couples who are just kind of put together and nothing really happens and they've spoken to each other like twice, and it's just not very satisfying to read about. That's partly because Dickens seems to become a lot more interested in love as a thing in his later novels than in his early ones, but it's another thing that slightly irritates me about Nicholas Nickleby. For example, the character of Madeline, who is Nicholas's love interest in part of the book, I just don't like her. She just, yeah, she faints a lot. To give you an even stronger example of the way women are presented in Nicholas Nickleby, here is an illustration from Nicholas Nickleby. This is the illustration I used on the front cover of my dissertation, which was about Dickens and gender, and I do think it kind of sums up Nicholas Nickleby a little bit. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm very fond of many things, but Nicholas Nickleby is not my favourite. Before I go, I'm just going to mention one screen adaptation, and that is this film from 2002. There is also a slightly longer TV movie from 2001 that I haven't yet seen, but sounds really good. Kate Howell recently did a review of it on her channel. I will link her review down below, and I'm definitely going to try and see that soon. For now, I will talk about this. I really enjoy this film. It captures that really fun, entertaining, adventurous spirit of Nicholas Nickleby, which is something I really enjoy about the book, as well as kind of doing a little bit more with Kate Nickleby and making her a slightly more interesting character in terms of standing up for herself, which she doesn't really do much of in the book. She requires a lot of rescuing from her brother, etc. I think this film is just thoroughly enjoyable, and Jamie Bell plays Smike and is beautiful, as Smike always is. I love Smike. So yes, that was Nicholas Nickleby. I feel like I'm gonna have a hard time persuading you I do actually love Dickens. I really do. I just have my issues with Dickens as well, which I think is healthy. I think you should have this kind of love-hate relationship with your favourite author where you love them and you get irritated with them when they do bad things, like present women who have no personality. No Dickens. It's not okay. I'll be back tomorrow with another Dickens book. What? What is that word, Dickens?